Hey there everybody, welcome to Storytime with Jasper. We are here today to bring you another story that can be used to think about your own story. To think about the choices that you make in your story. Because remember, your story is unique and special. And the choices that you make won't just affect your story, but it'll also affect everyone else around you and their stories. So with that being said, we're going to take a look back into our book written by Roald Dahl, The Twits. Now the choices that they make in this story are not that nice, but it has been a very fun read to go through, and if you've been enjoying it, I hope that you will enjoy this story time as well. We're going to get started here in a second. Make sure you got yourself a nice comfy place to watch and listen to our story. Make you have a pillow, your favorite plushie with you. I have Zilla with me as always, and we are going to get right into where we left off in The Twits. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. When last we left off, the Twits had just gotten done with a ridiculous prank where Mr. Twit had tried to make Mrs. Twit think she was getting shorter. And that resulted in Mrs. Twit falling from a bunch of balloons on top of Mr. Twit and beating him with a cane. So that was ridiculous. So now we're going to jump into the next ridiculous story. Zilla, are you ready for this story? Ah, sure you are. Come on, buddy. Let's get started. Our next chapter is called The House, the Tree, and the Monkey Cage. Now, we've heard a lot about Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit, but enough about that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house. It looks like a prison and not a window anywhere. So now we get to finally see what their house looks like. Take a look. You see that? No windows on the houses. Their garden is not taken care of in any way, shape, or form. And this is the place where Mr. and Mrs. Twit live. Now, who wants windows? Mr. Twit had said when they were building it. Who wants every Tom, Dick, and Harry peeping into seeing what you're doing? It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out of, not looking into. And what do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at throwing thistles and stinging needles. Now, I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging needles, she used to say. They keep out nasty, nosy little children. Ew. Near the house, you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side, there is a big dead tree. It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree, you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit, and you will hear about them later. Now, once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds, and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put up the ladder against the dead big tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, birds would fly in from all around to roost for the night in the big dead tree. They didn't know, poor things, that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug-Tight. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was bird pie day, Mr. Twit would climb up the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck to the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were. The song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little Jenny Warens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. Look at that. Didn't matter what kind of bird, as long as it was a bird, it was going in the bird pie. The next chapter is called Four Sticky Little Boys. On one Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with Hugtite, four little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning up against the big dead tree. They decided to climb up it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, and he found four miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as they could be by the seats of their pants to the branches. There were no birds, because the presence of the boys had scared them away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it'll have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny little bones." The boys were terrified. "He's gonna boil us!" cried one of them. "He'll stew us alive!" wailed the second one. "He'll cook us with carrots!" cried the third. But the fourth little boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, "Listen, I've just an idea. We're only stuck by the seats of our pants. So quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground." Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran home with their naked bottoms winking at the sun. Well, at least the boys had escaped the clutches of the Mr. Twit. And now we come to the Great Upside Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The four monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. They were the Mugglewump and his wife and their two small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and the rest of that kind of nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would own the first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. That meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down on their hands with their feet in the air. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the very top. They even had to eat and drink upside down, and that is not an easy thing to do because the food and water has to go up your throat instead of down your throat. In fact, it is almost impossible. But the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. All this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy standing on their heads for hours on end. Sometimes the two small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their heads. But Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day, and if they didn't do as they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick. Remember her walking stick? The next chapter is the roly-poly bird to the rescue. Mugglewump and his family longed to escape the cage in Mr. Twit's garden and go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. "Fly away, birds," they used to shout, jumping in and around the cage, waving their arms. "Don't sit on that big dead tree. It's just smeared all over with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else." But these were English birds, and they couldn't understand the weird African language the monkeys spoke. So they took no notice and went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Mrs. Twit's bird pie. Then one day, a truly magnificent bird flew down out of the sky and landed on the monkey cage. "Good heavens!" cried all the monkeys together. "It's the roly-poly bird! What on earth are you doing over here in England, roly-poly bird?" Like the monkeys, the roly-poly bird came from Africa, and he spoke the same language as they did. "I've come for a holiday," said Roly-Poly Bird. "I like to travel." He fluffed his marvelous colored feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. "For most people," he went on, "flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing." "Do you know how to talk to these English birds?" Mugglewump asked him. "Of course I do," said Roly-Poly Bird. "It's no good going to the country and not knowing the language." "Then we must hurry," said Mugglewump. "Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder painting sticky glue on all the branches of the big dead tree. This evening, when the birds come to roost, you must warn them not to perch on that tree or they will be made into bird pie." That evening, the roly-poly bird flew around and around the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stuff all over the tree. If you land on the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket to snatch the birds from the big dead tree, there wasn't a single one on it. They were all sitting on top of the monkey cage. The roly-poly bird was there as well, and Mugglewump and his family were inside the cage, and the whole lot of them were laughing at Mr. Twit. Mr. Twit wasn't going to wait another week for his bird pie supper. He loved bird pie. It was his favorite meal. So that very same day, he went after the birds again. This time, he smeared all top bars of the monkey cage with sticky glue, as well as the branches of the big dead tree. "Now I'll get you," he said, "whichever one you sit on." The monkeys crouched inside the cage watching all of this, and later on, when the roly-poly bird came swooping in for an evening chat, they shouted out, "Don't land on our cage, roly-poly bird! It's covered in sticky glue! So is the tree!" That evening, as the sun went down and all the birds came again to roost, the roly-poly bird flew around and around the monkey cage and the big dead tree, singing out his warning. "There's sticky stuff now on the cage and the tree. If you land on either, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish up tomorrow in a hot bird pie." The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket, not a single bird was sitting on the tree, either the monkey cage or the big dead tree. Now, they were all perched happily on the roof of Mr. Twit's house. The roly-poly bird was up there as well, and the monkeys were in the cage, and the whole lot of them were hooting with laughter at Mr. Twit. "I'll wipe that silly laugh off your beaks," Mr. Twit screamed at the birds. "I'll get you next time, you filthy feathery frumps. I'll wring your necks, the whole lot of you, and have you bubbling in the pot for bird pie before this day is out." "How are you going to do that?" asked Mrs. Twit, who had come outside to see what all the noise was about. "I won't have you smearing sticky glue all over the roof of our house." Mr. Twit got very excited. "I've got an idea," he cried. He didn't bother to keep his voice down because he didn't think the monkeys could understand. "We'll go into town right away and we'll buy a gun each," he shouted. "How's that?" "Brilliant!" cried Mrs. Twit, grinning and showing her long yellow teeth. "We'll buy those big shotguns that spray out 50 bullets or more with each bang." "Exactly," said Mr. Twit. "Lock up the house while I go and make sure the monkeys are safely shut away." Mr. Twit went over to the monkey cage. "Attention!" he barked in his fearsome monkey trainer voice. "Upside down, all of you, and jump to it. One on top of the other. Quick, get on with it, or you'll feel Mrs. Twit's stick across your backsides." Obediently, the poor monkeys stood on their hands and clambered on top of each other, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest child at the very top. "Now stay there until I come back," Mr. Twit ordered. "Don't you dare move, and don't overbalance. When we return in 2 or 3 hours' time, I shall expect to find you all in exactly the same position as you are now. You understand?" With that, Mr. Twit marched away. Mrs. Twit went with him, and the monkeys were left alone with the birds. Now, that is a lot of different things that have happened in today's story. But I think we need to go ahead and take a quick break until the next time we get together. Remember, anytime that we've looked at this story, we've seen that the Twits are not nice at any point in the story. So really be thinking about when you are going about your own story today, that you are showing kindness, that you're finding things to be thankful for, so that you can make your story a good one. All right, everybody? Thank you very much for spending time with me here at Storytime with Jasper, and I hope to see you again soon. All righty? Take care.